Welcome, 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 welcome. Today I have international speaker, anthropologist, author, Veronica Kirin. We're about to get into it right now. We're going to go into our Biz Dev theme song, and we'll be right back with you. Here we go. By Cameron T. One day I'm going to get good at the transitions. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. This is business development, not even selling it. This is intelligent. If you watch it, I promise you benefit. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T.
Hey, Cameron, looks like you're muted.
One day I'll get the technical things. It's nice for the folks that have the money and the resources to have other people running the show for you. I'm doing everything from my control center, so bear with me. Thank you very much. International keynote speaker Veronica Kirin is an expert at showing audiences how to transform their work from a horizontal doing everything at once model to a vertical empire building strategy that expands the ideas of entrepreneurs, change makers, and innovators to a strategic multi-year plan. She is an author, anthropologist, and entrepreneur whose most notable business, award-winning tech company GreenCup Digital, was scaled over the course of her tenure and sold in 2018. She is named by Forbes as one of 5 notable graduates of Grand Valley State University, has been recognized as founder of a top women-owned business, is a recipient of the Corp Magazine Business Diversity Leader Award, a BQ 40 LGBTQ Business Leaders Under 40 awardee, and owns the first business in Grand Rapids to be certified by the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. Veronica is the author of Stories of Elders, What the Greatest Generation Knows About Technology That You Don't, a best-selling book exploring how technology changed America based on the interviews of people born before 1945, which has been presented on the TEDx stage. She has presented her workshops and keynotes at conferences, training forums, and universities across the world. Please welcome Veronica. Thanks for being with me.
Hey, Cameron, thanks for having me this morning.
So I heard the book has won awards as late as last night and last week, right?
Yeah. So it's been quite an eventful July for my book, which my book has been out since 2018. But yeah, so last night we received the finalist designation for general history by the International Book Awards. And last week it won the U.S. history category for the National Indie Excellence Book Awards. And so it's a very exciting time here. We're kind of hustling back here in the office, which, as you can see, my office is very much a, COVID at home office.
Absolutely.
But, myself and my assistant, we're working hard to say, hey, this is amazing. And the people, most importantly, that I interviewed, their stories are being elevated, and we're really paying attention to how tech today is affecting our lives. I mean, more so than ever before. And so it's really an honor, but also really important for the stories that I gathered.
That's amazing. So talk to me about your story. Why are you passionate? Why have you been driven? Like, I think this is 3 books?
No, this is my first book. I'm working on my second book now, and I have a couple of short stories and poetry pieces that are being published in journals, but this is my first official book.
Okay, so I saw some different things on the website, and I know that you got tons of resources for people. I love it. People got to go and check out the website as well. If people are interested in that, what's the website that they should go to?
Storiesofelders.com, and that's where they can find the book, but also watch the documentary, which received a laurel this year as well at a film festival And there's a podcast because I gathered so much audio footage that there just wasn't a way to include it all in the book. And the book, of course, is focused, as we said, on technology. And not all the stories I gathered were specific to technology, but they were still worth sharing. So the podcast is doing that.
That's amazing. So I want to get into sort of some of the business pieces that you're, advocating and really helping people with. But I wanted to sort of get some of the background and get some of the reason why folks, might be interested in why and understand why you're passionate about what you do. So tell us about your history, your background, education, and what's gotten you to this point now. Why are you, working on that second book? I'm always interested in what drives people.
Mm-hmm. Well, really, I like to think in terms of 100 years, much more long term than many people tend to think, even though that is the term of our life. We've got 60 to 100 years here on Earth. And for some reason, that's just how my brain is wired. And so that's what drew me to anthropology, thinking about our past and our history, how that plays a role today, how different people are doing different things, and what's going to benefit my work the most. So, I might have grown up in a specific culture group, but that doesn't mean that I have to stay and adhere to that culture group if it's not serving myself or the work or the world, quite frankly. And so with that said, I came up thinking actually that I was going to be a humanitarian for my life. And of course I still am, but I started my career in the disaster relief sector. I was working with the National Civilian Community Corps, deploying across the United States for disasters like Katrina and the tsunami that hit American Samoa in 2009. And so I thought that I was going to go ahead and move forward with the Peace Corps and then work for the UN. That's what I thought my life was going to be. I still serve today, but I serve in a very different way because I have post-traumatic stress disorder from doing that work. And so life got derailed. If you look at some of my work history, which you can see on LinkedIn, there's a little bit of a gap. And that's because I was managing my mental health and figuring out, what do I do with my life? And I see that in a lot of entrepreneurs as well, is that when something comes in and derails the project, or they have a life derailment, it causes a crisis of identity. And you have to go through that process to figure out, okay, what pieces of me are actually me, and what pieces of me were identifying with a title or identifying with a role. And so it took me a couple of years in my 20s to really figure out, like, who am I and what am I here to do? So those pieces of service, those pieces of thinking long term and helping the world in whatever way I can emerged as core values within myself. And that's about the time that I became an entrepreneur. So I started a nonprofit trying to grapple with what I thought my career was meant to be. And just so everybody knows, nonprofit's kind of like the hardest way to become an entrepreneur. And so I burnt out on that, and still was trying to manage my own mental health, the ramifications of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's when I started my tech company, which you mentioned, GreenCup. And so that's where I really cut my chops on scaling. That's where I realized the difference between being an entrepreneur, a freelancer, and having a job. The trap that a lot of entrepreneurs fall into, especially when it's their first one, that they create a job for themselves instead of create freedom. And so I had to go through the evolution of working 70 hours a week and wondering why I feel like I am more stressed out than I was working for somebody else, learning what scaling is, learning what scaling means for both a tech company and also for what I wanted, getting the company down to 10 hours a week, and then eventually selling it in 2018.
Yeah. And I really want to get into that story because I think that's so useful to folks, having a business and just, I'm going to do this until I die, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Maybe it's what you want to do, but maybe it's not. And how do you set yourself up for an actual exit so that you can get off of the hamster wheel, so to speak. So I love that piece of your story, but I want to also, sort of fill everybody else in on stuff. So you were working in GreenCup, you did the successful sale of that. And then what have you been doing since?
Yeah, so part of the reason I sold the company is that I realized, I had started GreenCup as a exit strategy when I was being laid off from my only corporate job, which was in tech. And so that's not exactly the best reason to start a company. It's better to start a company going towards something, having a North Star to go towards, rather than running away from something. So I was running away from the layoff and running away from working for corporate. But I discovered everything that I love about entrepreneurship through that. And I actually had a few small ventures in between as well. And so really I decided to sell it partly because it wasn't the right fit for me, partly because I realized that what I was doing a lot in the company was coaching, which is what I do today. So my clients would come to me needing something for their online marketing, for their web presence, content, design, etc. And I would ask them where their business plan was. I would ask them what their 3 to 5 year plan was. I would ask them what's their brand identity. And they didn't have it oftentimes. And so then I would end up coaching them. And I would say, okay, well, you need to get this done. So here are the steps that you need to take. Here are some strategic partners that we work with in order to manage that for you. And so I was really becoming somebody who was coaching other entrepreneurs, and the web was just an incidental.
And I'm assuming that you enjoyed that because that's what you chose to do rather than
exactly. So that's kind of like that manifestation of like, I wanted to help others. I want to be in a service role. And so I'm not in the field in disasters anymore. I'm not doing case studies or case working, on the ground with FEMA or the Red Cross. But what I am doing is having a wide and actionable impact by helping other entrepreneurs scale up, which is more like a butterfly effect. So I help one person scale their business, but then they hire 4 employees, and then they sell their product or their service, which helps hundreds of people. And so that's a way that I am still having impact today that's still in line with my original goal of humanitarianism.
I was going to say, you get to see your impact really, really full out that way.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other reason I sold GreenCup was because Stories of Elders was about to be released. And I had drove 12,000 miles across America while running GreenCup. I had interviewed and met with 100 strangers while running GreenCup. I had transcribed these 100 interviews into a book in a manuscript, procured a publisher, and started my marketing for the book, all while running GreenCup. And it was too much. And so I really
when you start talking about transcribing and all that stuff, like you start hurting my brain because I've done a little bit of it, and it's not necessarily fun work.
No, actually, I didn't mind the transcribing too much because actually just as a matter of fun. So this is the book I'm writing right now, and so I take copious notes. I know enough anthropologically that I need to take copious notes. So the transcription wasn't too painful. But what I found actually the most painful was the audiobook process. And I had a fantastic team on my side helping me to bring that to life. And I still I'm just not made for it, I guess.
because you had to like sit there and do audio take after audio take with the book.
Yeah. And so, for anyone who's thinking about writing a book and they're going to have an audiobook, I highly recommend audiobook. It's a great way to get your book in front of people who otherwise would not read it. And you want to have a reader with you. So for Stories of Elders, I'm sitting in the booth. My friend is alongside the engineer reading the passages that I'm reading into the microphone and saying, hey, you mispronounced that word, because you don't always hear your mispronunciations in your head. Or they would buckle in when there were certain quotes coming from certain people. I'm not just reading my own writing, remember. I'm reading the words of other people who use language differently, who have accents that are different than mine. They live across America. And so they would kind of buckle in when they would see so-and-so coming up, because they know that I always stumble through their quotes. And so I think that was part of the challenge, was that it's not just my words. I'm not just flowing with what I think needs to appear on the page. I'm also trying to relay what other people have said about technology.
Well, that's amazing. And I love the fact that you have the audio, because that's how I'm digesting a lot of books. Mm-hmm. I'm up at 6 a.m. I'm exercising, and I don't get a lot of time to actually sit down. I have 4 children. I don't have a lot of time to actually sit down beyond the business and the Zoom calls and the this and that, to actually sit down with the book in a quiet nook, fully rested to take on a book. So while I'm, on the bike, I'm digesting traction and profit first and, all all these great
well, I
books.
love that you bring that up though, because that like work-life balance is so important to our success. And I love that it sounds like you have a morning routine that you've discovered works for you, that brings you that energetic place that you need to be in order to serve, while still also being able to serve your family.
Yeah, no, it's so key. I find it to be something, I've just recently, read Atomic Habits for the first time, and just building those habits and those pieces into your existence that help you be productive and happy.
Right, exactly. I mean, it comes down to brain chemistry, which I'm sure that you've read so many books about this, but it really does come down to brain chemistry. And there's plenty of studies that show that priming our minds in the morning, how we use and treat our mornings, sets up the rest of our day, which is very similar to how business works, where if we have a really solid foundation for our business, and if you want an empire, you need a foundation for that so that you can grow vertically, as we kind of mentioned. You have to have that priming set up. Otherwise, things are just going to fall apart eventually without a solid foundation.
Absolutely. Let's get into some of I feel like we're pretty much caught up. Yeah. I mean, I know that we talked about the coaching, the books. I wanted to just kind of hit on the speaking that you've done. And because I know for a lot of people, that's their biggest fear. But, being a thought leader and being somebody that's out there, it helps, especially if you're an entrepreneur. I was just watching Dan Loke, who's a popular YouTuber. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but, basically he's saying, like, if you're shy, like, don't be an entrepreneur, because, one way or another, you need to be out, whether you're hiring people, whether you need to have that interaction. And I think there's levels of introverted and extroverted, and I certainly feel introverted in some ways, but I know that if I was totally within my shell, I couldn't do this right now, right? So how have you pushed yourself to be? I know you were talking about struggling with the audiobook process, which is a little bit different than speaking on a stage, but how have you pushed yourself to sort of be that person in the spotlight?
So I actually used to be terrified of public speaking. And what I learned over this many years, this process, is that first of all, it's not about me. And second of all, when I'm speaking about a topic that I'm passionate about and that I know is going to change the lives of others for the better, again, it's not about me anymore. It just kind of comes through me. And so what I've discovered is a lot of this work that I'm doing is conduit work, that I'm just kind of the messenger. And again, the fact that I'm the one on stage isn't necessarily the important thing. The important thing is the message and that it's getting across to the audience. And so once I started speaking about, I don't know, like when I was in high school and we're talking about whatever, like, report that we're doing, like, oh my God, that terrified me. It was awful because I didn't have the passion for the topic. I didn't know it inside out. And I didn't, I was doing it because I had to. The second that I had the opportunity to talk about things that really mattered to me and that really mattered to other people, and I could see the aha moments happening in the audience, that's when public speaking became just second nature for me. But I have discovered, through introspection, just as you said, we have to be really in touch with ourselves and who we are. And I've discovered that I'm an ambivert. So I really need that recharge time like an introvert would. But I can definitely turn it on. If you put me in a crowd, I'm good. I'm happy to be there.
I love that. And I think a lot of that, I sort of heard it in what you were saying, but that imposter syndrome, and this is one of the things that we want folks to take away from this conversation today. So, I've definitely felt it. I have a business. It does relatively well, but maybe there's this person over there that is doing, X multiples better, or at least that is the supposition, right? The from the social media. Am I qualified to talk on this? What information do I have to give? Am I that, do I have something valuable? So, I think that imposter syndrome plays into all of it. I've definitely overcome it in some place, but then sometimes I get into that, space between the ears. I love that expression, where it's not always positive, and it maybe intimidates me or keeps me from being as vocal or being as out forth as I want to be.
Cameron, have you read the book Steal Like an Artist?
Say it again.
Steal Like an Artist.
Deal, like D-E-A-L?
Steal.
Feel?
Steal, like you're taking from a bank.
Steal. Oh, steal like an artist?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. No, I haven't. I got to check it out.
I do. I highly recommend it. It's quite short. But this is a really great example of repurposing your imposter syndrome. So for people who feel like I'm not worthy, that person's already talking about this, why should I be talking about it too? For example, my second book, this book that I'm working on right now, is called Stories of COVID. I am not the only expert out there studying how this paradigm shift is affecting the world. So why do I have the authority to talk about it? What Steal Like an Artist teaches us is that everyone out there might be using language that's all the same, or we might have a lot of overlap, but we all as individuals have different backgrounds and different experiences, and that informs what we're speaking to, which means that no matter what, you're going to have a different take on it. So to pull away from that imposter syndrome and affirm that you are a unique individual, and that is good, and that you are not in the same place as your competitor, and that is good, because if you were exactly the same as your competitor, then you truly would be competitors.
Right.
But you're not. You're unique. So no matter what, there's a place for you, and what you have to say or the work that you have to do is going to be unique in and of itself, even if you're in the same industry, even if you're speaking on the same topic.
Yeah, I compare that or contrast that or add to that, however you want to put it, but with like the idea of abundance, where there's enough for everybody, and the idea of documenting the process. Like, if you're not where you think you need to be, then you're documenting, and that's helping people as well, which I think is such a great strategy right now, especially with social media, just to letting people know, hey, this is how I do it, and you can do it as well, which it's a big part of helping people.
Yeah, absolutely. So how else have you seen imposter syndrome arise? Let's kind of dig into this topic a little bit.
How have I
experienced imposter syndrome?
I mean, just exactly like I was saying before, just feeling like I may not have all the answers that, or that my answers aren't sufficient because I'm not as successful as I would like to be. I'm talking about to people business tips and tricks on how to get better. And, I still have things to improve upon. I'm not, master of the universe running $1 billion company. So, what do I have to share? Now, I buffer that with, and I tame it with the fact that I know that I have accomplishments, and I, read the self-help books, and I know what I'm thankful for. And I know that I'm happy, which, I think is a lot more than can be said for maybe some folks that have a lot of money in their pocket, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And as we said, you use language, you use your tools, you use expertise in different ways than others. And that is completely valid. And honestly, I mean, we all know the stories about the famous authors who didn't write their first book until they were 55, or the famous pianist who didn't pick up piano until they were 73. There's no stopping point to life until we actually stop life. But for some reason, especially in our culture, there's this mythos around, if I haven't done it by the time I'm 30, I'm in trouble, or I'm over the hill when I'm 40. Nothing good can happen after that. And it's insanity to me, because it halts progress. It halts the ability to become exactly who you're meant to be. I mean, your entire life, Cameron, might be set up for what you discover when you turn 73.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that going back to that sort of life is abundant, there's a lot out there, and it's never too late. I know, people get into the birthday thing. I don't know about you, but the birthday comes around. It's like, what have I accomplished? But understanding that I have had an impact I have touched somebody's life. I am doing good things. It's sort of one of those things that makes me feel a little bit better when those birthdays come around and we mark another year.
Yeah. Do you keep a memories list of like good things that happen every single month?
I do it daily.
Year?
I do it daily. I guess I putting something on like a monthly map would be pretty cool. So I got my 13-year-old, soon to be 14-year-old daughter. So that'll be on the list of things to do.
Yeah, because it gives you this high level overview, because there's good things every single day, of course. So keep doing that, because it reminds our brains that, like, even if I don't feel like I accomplished a whole lot today, there was still good stuff that happened, even if it was just the sun was shining. So today was a good day. It was worth the time. But then there's these spikes, like the book awards that, I just received. And so those are like the kind of, highlight shiny things. If you have a yearly good things list where just like the peak things go, whatever that means to you, it doesn't have to be an award. It doesn't have to be a speaking event. It can be, having your first child, buying a house, getting a car, learning a new skill, getting a certificate, whatever you feel like is worth remembering when you look back over a year. Just start logging those.
I love
that.
that.
Then when you reach your birthday or New Year's is when a lot of people do this as well. They start to look back and go, oh, what do I need to do?
I think that's so important, because so many people are in a negative headspace. People are dealing with depression. So to have those kind of tools that you have, maybe on the wall in the kitchen where you pass by every day, or, wherever it makes the most sense to you to have it, but to have those kind of reminders of the impact and the beautiful things that are happening. Those are great tools. It's great advice. Thank you.
Definitely. And definitely, I mean, like, as you said, with depression and suicidal ideation, I've been there, I've been in those shoes. And it seems like keeping a gratitude journal, like, whatever, how is that going to change anything? Or even just writing little affirmations. Like, I would like to take a dry erase marker and write something on the mirror in the bathroom, so that when you glance into it, inevitably, whether or not you are somebody who wears makeup, you're looking in the mirror at least once a day. We just do. And so you have this affirmation reflecting back on you. You put positivity in your way, so that it subliminally starts to seep in. And maybe from day 1 to day 2, it's not a big change. Maybe it's so minute that you didn't even notice. But day 1 to day 90, your outlook may be just a little bit more positive, may feel a little bit more able, may feel a little bit better. And so that's how that habit brain of ours works, is that a lot of times the unconscious, it takes time, and that's okay, but that requires patience on our part as well in order to work with it as we're growing.
I love that. And I think it's such an important part of business, because there's always ups and downs in business. There's always wins and there's losses. And if you pay too much attention to any one thing, it can be very challenging, because if you're totally about the win when things aren't going well, then it's like, what's going on? And then
we tie our identity to that. I mean, as entrepreneurs, our identity is tied deeply into our business. So if the business is on a high, we feel like we're on a high because we feel validated. When the business goes down, or you lose a client, something happens, what have you, our identity tied to that too.
Now you feel judged. You feel like the world is on you.
Yeah, what did I do wrong? I'm a failure. And you like to go into that. I mean, it's
and it might not have been about you. It may have been something.
Probably not. Right. Yeah. It probably wasn't. Your employee probably left because they really needed a better fit, and it was a fit issue, not a you issue. Or your client, their budget crashed, or whatever the reason. Right. So it's okay, but that's where it takes that intentional patience and processing to separate our identity. And so to come back actually to imposter syndrome, because identity is so critical for imposter syndrome. And you actually said something earlier that I really want to touch on, that you feel like, okay, you've processed through imposter syndrome, but every so often it still comes up. So you've done all the work and yet it still comes up. And I want to assuage people's nerves around this, because imposter syndrome is part of our fight or flight mechanism. So it's going to keep coming up always. You will always have it with you because it is simply part of that parts of our brains, the amygdala, that is animalistic. And when we end up in a room that we don't recognize ourselves in. So, for me, a queer woman in tech, I was in a lot of rooms with straight men in suits, and I felt the odd woman out for sure. Or you go through an up level and suddenly you're in a room with VCs, and it happens so fast that you didn't have time to integrate it into your identity. That can start to shock people and pull you out. You get the fear portion of my business is on the line, which, remember, it's tied to your identity, which means we start to go to fear because our livelihood and our security is threatened, even if it's not truly, it's perception. And so then that triggers fight or flight. And when we do fight or flight, we start to get into self-sabotage. We try to escape the room because we don't feel like we belong there. And I'm using room metaphorically. It may be legitimately a room that you're in with VCs, or this might be a new situation that you find yourself in. Whatever it is, you try to escape it because it doesn't feel right, because you haven't integrated the success, even though you drew those opportunities to you.
Yeah.
You brought that to you through being ready, through working your mama, right? Through your connections. That door would not have opened if you hadn't been able to set it all up. So you're meant to be there. But if we're not integrating our identity into the up level, then we trigger into fear, which triggers fight or flight, and then we self-sabotage. Yeah, and that's why we go through imposter syndrome cycles. It's going to happen because you're always up leveling, unless you choose not to up level. And then, what are you doing with your days?
So let's say we're on the right path. We got the positive mindset. How do we scale our businesses, Veronica?
Yeah. So scaling was an adventure for me, for sure, because I was doing a lot of it alone. I had a couple mentors, but the place that I was in, the era, let me remind everybody, in 2012, coaching wasn't really a thing. I mean, it was sort of starting to emerge, but especially where I was living, which was a fairly conservative city, coaching wasn't around. I was one of the first coaches in my city. And so I had, some random guys who were ahead of me in business that I had met at a networking event. And so we'd have coffee maybe like 4 times a year. And so those were my mentors, right? So some of the issues I was facing didn't always jive because the sexism wasn't totally understood. It was empathized with, but wasn't understood.
Right.
And then the scaling needs, meeting with somebody 4 times a year and just talking over a cup of coffee for an hour doesn't necessarily get you to that next level. So I felt very alone in it. One of them did put a book in front of me that really helped that process, which was called Built to Sell. So anyone who is frustrated by being on the hamster wheel, I suggest starting there. It's called Built to Sell. And that's how I understood and realized that scaling is a thing, and I need to scale because I want to sell. I knew I wanted to sell my company. Since then, I developed my own 3 pillars of business scaling. And so I've simplified the process, and it works for any business. And if you don't believe me, feel free to call because I will happily walk you through it, cater to your business. But first pillar is automation. So anything within your business that you do repeatedly that you are not necessary to be a part of the process. So like managing your contacts list, get a CRM, managing your calendar, get Calendly or Acuity, getting recurring invoices going. You don't need to be clicking that button every month. The system can do it for you. So automate as much of your business as possible. And today, the way technology is going, there's almost no excuse. There are so many tools out there. I mean, these days you can automate podcast editing. There's software out there that will remove ums and pauses and smooth it all out for you. You don't even have to hire an engineer. You don't even have to do it yourself. So automate your business as much as possible. The second pillar of business scaling, once you've automated, these have to go in order. Once you've automated, you systemize. So what are you doing repeatedly, but you have to be involved. It requires the human touch for some reason. So for this was the proposal process for me. I could systemize it, but I had to be involved to some extent because I needed to do the intake, and then I needed to customize the proposal. There was some automation to it, but for a lot of it, a human had to be involved in order to create the proposal and get it out to the client in the way that made sense, that was custom. Once your systems are built, well, actually, I want to back up on that, because there's another reason you want systems. Systems are also studyable. You can study them. So in business, you want to be using what I call the scientific method of business, which is you have a theory, you think you've got something that's going to work, but now you've got an if-then statement. So if I do this, then this will happen. And just like a scientist, now you need to go test it. If you have a system, that's a formula, and you can test different pieces along the way. And that's how I got my conversions to be so high at my former company, is that I had every single client go through the exact same process from beginning to end. And then I could find the weaknesses, and then I could improve.
Yeah, this is a piece where, you know, I wish I knew this 9 years ago, but building out the processes and system for your business, not only so you know it well and you can do things like this kind of A/B testing, all right, I'm going to change this one element in the process and see what the change is, but just so that you can actually build and scale your company so that you can teach that to the next employee. But if it's all in your head, it's all in your head. And when you hire that person, it's going to be work to train them and show them, and you're expecting them just to be in your head instead of, you know, here's the manual, here's the training. Now you have it. And as long as you get to point Z, I don't care how you do it, as long as you follow the system.
Right. So you're skipping ahead of me, Cameron, because that's the third pillar of business scaling, is hiring. And so you're right. If it's all in your head, first of all, you're reinventing the wheel every time, because it's not going to be perfectly exact, because you're doing it from memory. So you need it documented simply so that you can test it, make sure it's working, pivot as you need to, but then eventually you need to hire. And ultimately, we all get to that point unless you want to remain a freelancer. If you're going to scale, if you're going to get to a 10-hour work week or 5-hour work week, or if you love working the 40 hours, but you want choice, which means freedom, you're going to need to enter hiring. And that can be through contractors, that can be through part-time, full-time employees. You can do however that makes sense for your company. But if you haven't systemized what needs to happen within your company regularly and documented it so you can hand it off, not only are you doing a whole lot of work just to train them, you're paying them to do things that you don't need to pay them to do. And you're also paying for a longer training period. And you're also maybe paying for things.
I've done that. I've paid people to, you know, I'm wanting them to do a certain job, but I'm paying them and they're not doing it because I didn't have a plan in place to begin with. Absolutely.
Right, right. And if you don't automate, then you're paying them for things that technology could do for you for free.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're not going to be as fulfilled because they'll know that you want me to be a robot. Like, we've all been in those jobs. We're like, really? I think that technology could probably handle this. I'm doing repetitive things every single day at work, and it seems boring. It doesn't seem fulfilling. I don't feel like I'm reaching my true potential. And so you're not going to have happy employees, fulfilled employees that are dedicated to the 50-year plan that you're building, right? We're building an empire here. But then, yeah, you're going to be paying them to train over and over until they get it, because you're trying to funnel what's in your brain into their brains.
Absolutely.
It doesn't work out well.
No, I absolutely agree. So run through those 3 pillars again. So for folks that are watching.
Definitely. Yeah. So you want to automate, then you want to systemize, then you can hire.
Yeah, I love that.
And I've actually had clients who hired poorly. And so then we have to walk it back. And there have been times where we go ahead and say, all right, we're going to lay everybody off because this is not working. And we need to start at the beginning in order to scale up properly. It's okay.
I've talked about it over and over again on this biz dev, because I read this book pretty close to starting this biz dev channel, and E-Myth by Michael Gruber.
Yep.
And just the talking about building out job descriptions as you're the entrepreneur, you're starting your company. you're doing all of the jobs. That's fine. Write out those job descriptions for each of the jobs that you're doing, because you're doing them, you know the systems and processes that you're using. And it was really interesting when just, a little more than a year and a half ago, I was hiring a bookkeeper, and it was like, all right, I don't know what the bookkeeper does. Well, I did. I just hadn't documented it. And now I'm halfway through the hiring process, and I find somebody who's a QuickBooks Pro. I use QuickBooks every day. That's what I need. I need somebody that's better at QuickBooks than I am.
Exactly.
And that was something I wasn't even looking for in my job description. But if I had built out those job descriptions as I was working, there wouldn't have been any disconnect between what I was looking for and what I needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, this makes a great point too about what the business is all about, to make sure that your mission, vision, and values are very clear from the get-go, because I understand when it's just us, it feels like, oh, I already know that, so I don't need to write it down. But the thing is, if you are working towards building an empire, I have a client that's doing just this. He wants an enormous empire. And it's going to take hundreds of employees to make happen. So that means that eventually the company is being controlled less and less by you. And so if there aren't bylaws in place, if the mission, vision, and value statements aren't very clear, if the handbook isn't including that, and it isn't actually written into the corporate bylaws, so it's legally bound within the company, it'll be very easy to get off track. And this is where you see so many companies that you saw start out with tons of good in their hearts and tons of fantastic social initiatives suddenly go off the rails, and you look back and you're like, man, that used to be such a great company. What happened? That's what happened. They scaled and they didn't have the values and the mission of the company written into the bylaws and written into every single job description.
I remember Google's original do no evil piece. That seems to, I don't want to call them evil, but I think that sort of is not
We're in a gray area. It's a gray area now.
Let's talk about the paradigm shift. So we have a lot of paradigm shifting. I think, we have a whole, especially inside of the United States, a whole social paradigm changing around race and sex and so much going on. I love the ideas around companies, and this isn't even sort of the moment, but it's definitely a part of Lilly Led Better Act and all that kind of stuff. But I love transparency in companies around pay scale. One of the things that I built in my staffing company is just we have a certain position, we pay, that's what we pay. We don't have a seniority scale or it's that's what we pay for the position, and our goal is to pay more across the board to everybody. Transparency in government and in corporate America and across the world, I think is such a big deal, because I think that really opens the doors to opportunity, both for the entrepreneur and for the individual, right? So, that idea of, let me see what's going on so I can take advantage of it. Why is this all hidden and closed away? That doesn't benefit us in government, I don't think. I don't think it benefits us within a corporation. So we have those major shifts going on, and different corporations doing things differently, which I think is really exciting. I like hearing those stories. We have the paradigms that are going across the country, and more accessibility to rights, or at least more visibility around the issues. We have right now in July 2020, we are still months later in the middle of a pandemic with no real clear end in sight. What are you telling people right now to both prosper in the moment and come out of this ahead of where they were?
Yeah. So I want to kind of reframe this from the micro to the macro, because I think this will serve us really well if we do that. So on the micro level, yes, we are reshaping what it means to work from home, what it means to be able to have meetings using tech, have access, human rights. This is all being reshaped right now within our world, worldwide. That's at the micro level. Those are the micro pieces. On the macro level, what is happening is that we have this shakeup, which is being caused by the pandemic. And when a paradigm shift happens, whether on the micro or the macro, and so I'm saying it this way because somebody in this video may watch this video someday, far after the pandemic is done, but they will have their own paradigm shift happening within their company, and they're going to need this. So when we go to the macro, what's happening?
I was just going to say, and to that very point, we know that the next thing is coming. 2001, planes crashed into the World Trade Center, world changed. I believe 2002, we had SARS, which wasn't a global pandemic, but it was certainly an epidemic in Hong Kong and China. And that was a major thing, all happening that decade. Go to
it doesn't even have to be at that large of a level, though.
It could be at the local of 2008, 2009 financial. We know, like, every 10 years at the very least, regardless of what's going on in your personal area or situation for the world, something's going to happen. So I think that message of, like, we need to be prepared for the next and understand that there will be a paradigm shift again, and sooner probably than you think.
Yes. But even on a micro scale, it can be much, much smaller than that. It can be an individual paradigm shift as well. Right. You get into an accident, now you're paralyzed. Yes. That's a paradigm shift. And that means everything in your life has to change. So what is a paradigm shift and what we're experiencing right now? What I'm trying to convey is that when we go through something like this, and I'm going into the anthropology of it to bring it back into business, all systems worldwide right now are in flux. We're basically living on quicksand because we don't know what's coming next, right? The habits, which we talked about, reinforce our world around us. The appearance of the world around us, by the way, is different because we're not going into work. We're not going into our third place, like coffee shops, co-working spaces. We're not going to networking events or meetings, right? So even our physical world has changed. Like, I don't have a private office right now because I'm sharing an apartment with my partner, right? So everything around us that reinforced the way things were have dissolved. That creates paradigm shift. That also creates a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of fear that can throw one into crisis because all of a sudden now we have to focus on every little thing in order to understand the world around us. So it used to be grab your reusable shopping bags, go to the grocery store, grab whatever you need off the shelf, come home, put it away, done. Now I have to put a lot of extra thought into that process. I can't take reusable shopping bags. If I go to the store, I have to stand in line. I have to make sure I brought my mask or I have to go home and get it again. Then I have to make sure I'm going through the aisles in the right direction. Then I have to get my stuff from somebody who's behind a plastic screen, go home, wipe everything down, and then get in the shower. It's a whole different process. So everything in our lives is taking a lot more brain power because the habits that we used to have don't serve us. It also throws us into crisis because it's creating a crisis of identity. I identified with going to networking events. I identified with being on stage. I identified with shaking hands and meeting people and, put yourself in those shoes. So that's what happens during a paradigm shift. And this could be happening to you in that something happened within your business that's no longer working, that's no longer serving, or you lost an employee, or you lost your biggest client. And that creates a paradigm shift for your company. It creates crisis. That's the moment where you get to choose. So the beautiful thing about quicksand, and I have a video on my YouTube page as well, if you're curious to go deeper with this, it's called what is it called? The Beauty of Quicksand, I believe is what I named it. But the beauty of quicksand is that it's shapeless, it's murky, it's moving all the time. Old institutions can't stand on it. The ways and systems that we used to live our lives can't stand on it. So it's freaky, but it also means we get to shape it the way that we individually want to. We can build the sandcastle the way we want to. And just like Earth used to be molten lava, it will eventually solidify and it will be much more difficult to make change at that point. So in this moment of crisis, in this moment of paradigm shift, whether it is micro at the level of just affecting you or your company, or macro affecting your community or the world, when the systems have dissolved, that's the opportunity to step out, assess, and say, do I need to make change so that when things solidify again, I have the life, I have the business, I have the opportunities that I always wanted, but found it so difficult to get to before because those constraints used to be in the way.
Absolutely. I think it's a life-shifting thing when you get into that sort of headspace where you understand that and kind of move forward, because you're thinking differently on how you build your business, but more importantly, your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely scary. Like, this is not easy stuff. It's okay to feel all kinds of sensations as you're going through it, but it brings so much opportunity that if you can step back from that, and you're probably going to go through the grieving process, and so allow yourself that space. But if you can step out of it a little bit and start to see what opportunity lies within this, what do I really want to change, or what have I been trying to change and it's not been working? Now that things have dissolved, just like, the caterpillar dissolves its body completely in order to become a butterfly, in that disillusion space comes the opportunity to reshape and be something different.
That's awesome. Yeah. Talk to us a bit about what we'll find in Stories of Elders. So I know you did a lot of traveling around the country. The book is winning awards. I'm going to throw the website up here so that people can see it. But talk to us about why we should go and read this book.
Yeah. So right now, the greatest generation, so people born before 1945, as we know, they're passing away, which means that this knowledge is passing away. What is this knowledge? Well, it is an understanding of the paradigm shift of the high-tech revolution, but it can't be totally understood unless it was lived in its entirety. So I interviewed people who grew up and remember getting the first radio in their houses. They remember the first television coming into their community. They remember the wars that shifted our culture. They remember nuclear technology being created, going to the moon for the first time, right? So they went from, and I interviewed actually somebody who said this, first house in the community that got electrified. And it was terrifying because people didn't understand electricity to the point of which they would not come over because they thought that the electricity was going to jump out of the sockets at them. The neighbors would not come over. So I interviewed people who went from that world, the analog pre-tech world, into high-tech. Now they're 100 years old at the book launch using their iPhone. Okay. That's the span of understanding that I wanted to address in Stories of Elders and preserve, because that roots us down. Just like we were talking about the foundation for your empire or the foundation for your day, the foundation for our culture, for understanding how high tech plays a role in our lives, is in this book.
I love that. I'm interested in some of the takeaways. I'm definitely going to pick up the book. I see a lot, with the Hamilton coming on to Disney Plus, the kids were excited. I was super excited to finally see the play because I never got a chance to see it on Broadway. Tickets were very expensive and I couldn't go by myself. So it would have been me, my wife, and 4 children. That's a little expensive. But that being said, the sort of, we get into this sort of place of like, oh, politics is so bad. They're saying things are so bad. And, like one of the examples, I was watching John Adams because I was like, all right, there's something on HBO and I can sort of continue this, deep diving into it. Yeah. And they called like John Adams, I'm going to say it horribly, hermaphrodite, somebody that's of both sexes, which is just,
intersex today.
Talk about, the sexual kind of thing. And this is going back a long time, and we're seeing it today played out, right? It's very interesting. We see so much and we hear so much more, and you get the pings on your phone, and this idea of us being so much closer to technology than we've ever been before. But things don't necessarily change. They're just maybe received differently. I'd love to hear some of your takeaways sort of around that kind of historical comparison to what things are going on now and things that they remember dealing with.
Well, what has changed is the tool. That's it. Our need for society still exists. Our need for communication, for community, for family, it all still exists. What has changed is the tool that facilitates those needs within our lives. And so with that, if we dumb it down and say, this is just a tool, it does not control me, even though there are apps designed on it to control you, because if they can make you addicted, then they get your ad dollars, right? Okay, going into the evil corporation space. But if we address it and just simply say, this is a tool, how do I want to use it? And I worked really hard, doing ethnography. So asking the same questions of all of the elders I interviewed. They got the same set of questions, to not lead them in bias, and to also make sure that I was capturing what they really thought about tech, not the gut reaction, because we all have the gut reaction. And what I found and what's conveyed in the book is the call to be mindful about controlling the tech in your life, and the concern that perhaps future generations aren't going to have the foundation of understanding the roots of tech, how our society was before it, so that we understand, like what's tech influence versus what's actually human influence. It's simply just making sure that we don't get addicted and that we don't overuse. And now, of course, today during the pandemic, where all of our work for the most part is online, that mindfulness comes even more into play. And so I'm sure, you've heard the idea of no tech mornings and no tech evenings, not looking at a screen right before you go to bed. So it's taking that mindfulness and impressing intentionality on technology, just like we intentionally eat. Hopefully, not all of us are able to do that, I understand, because sugar is an addiction. But, like, what do we want to put in our bodies? Do I want to go for a walk? Do I want to go for a run? Or as you say, go for a bike ride? Do I want to see my relative who is a little bit awkward today, or do I prefer to use my time differently? So we have intention throughout our lives in many different forms. Technology is just another one. It doesn't have to be, it can be.
All right, so how can folks get in touch with you if they're interested in having you speak, or they're interested in having you help them out with their business? What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you've got my website up. My website, veronicakirin.com, is a great place to go. You can find me on all the socials as well, which you can see at the top of my site there. But my social handle is VM, for my middle name, Marie Kirin. So VM Kirin, pretty much everywhere you can find me. But on my website, if you were to go to the About page, there is a button where you can sign up for a 15-minute complimentary call. So if you're feeling like we've stirred the pot here today and you want to know more about scaling your business, you want to know what are the next steps, how do I get to the freedom space instead of the hamster wheel space, you can go ahead and just sign up for a complimentary chat with me, and we'll see what we can do to move the ball forward for you. And if you're interested in speaking, my speaking page has my one sheet and contact for that as well.
That's awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation today. Thank you, Veronica.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cameron. I love what you're doing. And I think, this is so needed, that we need to be talking about what it all means. How do we grow? How do we do business effectively and intentionally and values oriented? I think it's really, really critical. So I think your show has emerged at a great time, and I look forward to seeing it grow over the next several years.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's definitely a work in progress. We are building the audience, and I'm looking forward to inviting you maybe a year or two from now and see how it's grown, and sort of see where you are. I'm very excited to see what businesses that you're going to get involved with, because I know they're going to see a lot of success. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
I'm going to let you have the last word and say goodbye to everybody, and then we'll get into the biz dev thing to roll us out.
Awesome. Everyone, don't forget that you are doing what you're doing for a reason. You are where you are for a reason. and you have all the opportunities ahead of you. Just keep going. You're rocking it.
Hang on for me.
Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. This is business development, not even selling it. This is intelligent. If you watch it, I promise you benefit. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T.